Hey, and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on the Bone Necromancer. Even after significant nerfs to the bone skills recently from Blizzard, I believe this will be one of the Necromancer's strongest options for both leveling a new character and completing all endgame content. The Bone Necromancer utilizes high critical strike chance coupled with vulnerability to deal 20% increased damage at nearly all times. The build has pulled some of the highest crits I've seen during the beta, and I'm confident the damage of the Bone Necromancer will be some of the best in the game. Now, with all that said, let's start working our way through the skill tree. Now, of course, we're going to start with Bone Splinters as our basic skill. It's going to fire 3 Bone Splinters, dealing 8% damage each. Each subsequent time an enemy is hit by the same cast of Bone Splinters, you gain 1 essence. Awesome. Then we're going to get Enhanced Bone Splinters, giving it a 25% chance to fire 2 additional projectiles if cast will have 50 or more essence. So keep that in mind. You want to stay high essence when you're using your basic skill. And then finally, we can unlock Bone Spear. Now, Bone Spear is so impressive to me. This ability just really, I think, is one of the strongest in the entire game. It has a 50% lucky hit chance, which is more than any other core skill I've actually seen yet. In addition, it does 85% damage and pierces through enemies. I think Bone Spear is probably one of the most powerful core skill abilities I've seen yet in Diablo 4. Once we get Bone Spear, we're going to want to go back up to our basic skill and get Initiate's Bone Splinters. This gives it a 20% chance per hit to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And the reason it's so important to get this as fast as we can is because that's going to give us 20% increased damage, and it's going to unlock a lot of synergies later on. Now, we're also going to want to do the same thing for Bone Spear, upgrade it to Enhanced Bone Spear. Bone Spear breaks into 3 shards when it is destroyed, dealing 25% damage each. Now, this is secretly, I think, one of the strongest upgrades for any core skill. If you can get a monster backed against a wall, you're going to shoot a Bone Spear at them, right? It's going to pierce them and then break on the wall, and then all 3 of those shards are going to fly into the monster's back, dealing 75% damage, right? 25 times 3. And so it's actually almost doubling the damage of your Bone Spear if you can actually position the monsters against a wall, right? If you can pull that off. And so that's why Bone Spear, it takes a little bit of positional prowess, but if you can do this correctly, Bone Spear can do an absolute insane amount of damage. Now, we're also going to get Supernatural Bone Spear for that vulnerability. The first enemy hit gets vulnerable for 3 seconds when you hit them with Bone Spear. So now both of our abilities cause vulnerability, and we finally unlocked Corpse and Macabre skills, and we're going to want to get Corpse Explosion. This is another ability that is incredibly powerful. The Necromancer actually had this ability nerfed recently by Blizzard, cutting the damage in half. Now it only does 50% damage to surrounding enemies, but it is still a very, very powerful ability, and really it's just a key Necromancer skill that most Necromancer builds are most likely going to take. Now, we also want to get Blood Mist. Blood Mist is incredibly powerful. Pretty much everything the Necromancer has, right? So this is so good because this serves as our unstoppable ability. So we're going to, instead of just go unstoppable, it actually makes the Necromancer immune. And the difference between that is that you also just can't take any damage at all. So let's say you get grabbed by the Blood Bishop or blinded or, put in shadow by the Tomb Lord. You can just click Blood Mist, and that's going to take you out of that crowd control effect and make you invulnerable essentially for 3 seconds. You do lose 20% movement speed while you're in Blood Mist, but it's really great as a way to escape because you can't actually use potions when you're crowd controlled. So keep that in mind. Blood Mist is a great way if you're taking a lot of damage and you're crowd controlled to just use Blood Mist and get out of that situation. Now, Corpse Explosion is extremely strong pretty much on its own, but we are going to upgrade it later because there's incredible synergies we can get. But for now, let's just pump points into Bone Spear. 4 out of 5. It's just so powerful, especially if you're, again, doing that positioning trick where the splinters are flying instantly into the target that you're shooting your Bone Spear into. And honestly, you can just keep putting points into it until it's 5 out of 5. From there, you want to upgrade Death's Reach, which is all the way here in the Curse skill tree. This is going to give you 4% increased damage to distant enemies. You're going to pretty much always want to be distant because all of your abilities are ranged. And so put 3 points into that to unlock Death's Reach up to 12%. So that's super strong. And finally, we can upgrade Corpse Explosion to Enhanced Corpse Explosion because we're about to unlock some massive synergies here with our next skills. And here you're at level 16. You're going to actually want to sacrifice your minions. I'll just mention that right now. And you're going to want to sacrifice the Skirmish skirmishers to increase your critical strike chance by 5%. Of course, we're going a very critical strike heavy build, and so we're going to want to increase that critical strike chance as much as possible. While we're level 16, we're probably about to leave Fractured Peaks, so I'm just going to really quickly talk about some aspects you should get. You're going to want to get Aspect of the Protector. Damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier. This is found in the Lost Archives and Fractured Peaks. Honestly, there's just not much for the Necromancer, in terms of pretty much any aspects that you can find guaranteed, because I think the build is already so strong. But this is a very good generic that you should get anyways, just to increase your survivability. And there is actually one good aspect for the Necromancer, Bone Necro, which is Aspect of Torment. And you can find this in the Black Asylum in Fractured Peaks. Critical strikes with bone skills increase your essence generation by 20% for a certain amount of time. So, this tooltip isn't super helpful. It doesn't even say where you can find it, but I know it's in the Black Asylum in Fractured Peaks. So get these two before you leave Fractured Peaks, because at level 16, you probably completed Act 1 and you're heading over to Skazglen already. Okay, so from this point, you're going to want to get Corpse Tendrils. Now, this ability is incredibly powerful when coupled with Corpse Explosion. So what this does is it makes veins burst out of a corpse, pulling in enemies, stunning them for 3 seconds, and dealing 20% damage to them, and it doesn't consume the corpse, which is very important. We're going to upgrade this so that enemies who are in range of Corpse Tendrils are slowed by 50% before being pulled, right? So now they're slowed. And then we're also going to get Plagued Corpse Tendrils. Enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils are made vulnerable for 3 seconds. So keep that in mind. We've got vulnerability, we've got slow, and we've got stun for 3 seconds, right? Now we're gonna get our final ability here, Plagued Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion deals 8% increased damage to enemies that are slowed, stunned, or vulnerable. These damage bonuses can stack. So you can see it's perfect synergy with the Corpse Tendrils. You basically cast Corpse Tendrils. They get all 3 of those status ailments all at once, and your next Corpse Explosion is now going to deal 24% increased damage, which is massive. So this is an incredible synergy between these two abilities. Really, really excited about that. So keep that in mind, put those two together, and you're going to have a really great time. And so at this point, I would start upgrading Corpse Explosion because it's just going to do so much damage. Also put points into Grim Harvest. Consuming a corpse grants 3 essence. This is extremely powerful because you're going to be using Corpse Explosion on enemies, and you're also going to want to get Fueled by Death. You deal 3% increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse, and we're going to make these even stronger. But after we get our ultimate, which was just unlocked at level 23, we're going to get Bone Storm. This is going to conjure a swirling storm of bone around you and your golem, dealing 180% to surrounding enemies over 10 seconds. Now, this ability isn't the strongest thing in the world, and actually I'm going to recommend you sacrifice your golem. I think the synergies between Corpse Tendrils and Corpse Explosion are stronger than what the golem can offer you. And then we're going to get Prime Bone Storm to give you 15% damage reduction, which is really nice. And then Supreme Bone Storm, your critical strike chance is increased by 20% while Bone Storm is active. That's huge, actually, increasing it by 20%. And we're also then going to start getting some bone passive skills here. Serration, your bone skills have a 0.5% increased critical strike chance for each 10 essence you have upon cast. So if you, just with 1 point, if you have 100 essence, this will give you 5% increased critical strike chance. So it's pretty strong, and it really actually makes this build want to have as much essence as you possibly can, which is why Aspect of Torment is really good to increase your essence regeneration whenever you get a critical strike. And so this will increase your chance to get a critical strike, which increases your chance to get more essence regeneration. So you can see there's tons of synergy already. We're going to want to get Compound Fracture as well. After critically striking 10 times with bone skills, your bone skills deal 5% increased damage for 5 seconds. Perfect. And then we also really want Evulsion. Your bone skills deal 6% increased critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. The reason Evulsion is so good is because enemies are going to be vulnerable pretty much the entire time, and you're going to be able to increase your critical strike chance by 20% while you have Bone Storm, which we just unlocked. So Evulsion, I'm going to recommend you pump that up as much as possible. Since your critical strike chance is so high, this is going to give you a lot of increased critical strike damage, which is just going to make you do an absolute insane amount of damage. And then you can also get Serration for that increased critical strike chance, get that 3 out of 3 as well. And then finally, we'll get Ossified Essence. Your bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 per cast. So that's up to 50% increased damage if you're full essence. Huge amount of increased damage. And then when you do unlock the Skeletal Mages, I recommend you sacrifice them for this bonus right here. You deal 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, but you can no longer summon Skeletal Mages. Not a problem. When you unlock Iron Golem, sacrifice it for, you deal 30% increased critical strike damage but you lose the ability to summon a golem. So super, super strong synergies there. Increased critical strike chance, increased critical strike damage, and increased damage to vulnerable enemies. So it all comes together really nice, sacrificing everything. And while we're talking about sacrificing everything, you're gonna want to put 1 point into standalone, which increases damage reduction by 6%, reduced by 2% for each active minion. We have 0 active minions, so we get that full 6% damage reduction. And then we want to get Memento Mori. It says sacrificing both skeletal warriors and skeletal mages increases their sacrifice bonuses by 20%. We can get that up to 60%. 60% of a 15% increase is something like 7%, right? So you get an additional 7% increased damage, and up here you get an additional a little more than 2.5% increased critical strike chance from those points. So that's really, really nice as well. Now, there wasn't really anything in Skazglen for the Bone Necromancer when it comes to aspects, and so I would recommend you actually go to Dry Steppes, because there's so much actually in Dry Steppes for the Necromancer. One of them is the most powerful, which is actually Splintering aspect. You're going to want to put this in your weapon. I think this is the strongest Bone Necromancer aspect you can find from dungeons guaranteed, which is Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for 1.5 seconds, and then Bone Shards from Bone Spear deal 50% bonus damage to vulnerable enemies and pierce them. So each shard did 25% extra damage, right? So 50% of 25 is something like, I don't know, let's say like 12.5. So you get 12.5% increased damage on each one of those splinters. And again, if you've got them positioned so that all 3 of the splinters are going to hit them, right? They're kind of backed against a wall, then that's like, it's 12.5 times 3. That's like, I don't even know, like 40% ish increased damage. So that's huge. It's a huge bonus. You can get this guaranteed every single time from Dry Steppes. And while we're in Dry Steppes, you also want to get Aspect of Might. This one's super powerful. I recommend almost every build get it pretty much. Basic skills grant 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds. You can get this in the Dark Ravine in Dry Steppes. The reason Aspect of Might's so good is because, I mean, 25% damage reduction. This is amazing. Super strong aspect for sure. And then this next one is one of my absolute favorites, Aspect of Grasping Veins. Gain 10% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds. When you cast Corpse Tendrils, you deal 30% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils. And you can unlock this by completing the Corrupted Grotto in Kyrgyzstan. So this one is perfect for our build. We're using Corpse Tendrils, following that up with a Corpse Explosion. And so it's extremely powerful to be able to get 30% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils, because we're building a very critical strike damage oriented build. While we're in Kyrgyzstan, we're also going to pick up Aspect of Retribution. Distant enemies have a 15% chance to be stunned. That's great, but more importantly, you deal 30% increased damage to stunned enemies. You can get this from the Abandoned Mineworks in Kyrgyzstan, and the reason that's so important is because Corpse Tendrils pulls enemies in, AoE stuns them for 3 seconds, so that is super strong, and you're going to get a massive 30% increased damage when they're stunned. And so that Corpse Explosion, that follow-up after you use Corpse Tendrils, I think is going to probably one-shot everything, or at least do a massive amount of damage, which is really, really exciting. Okay, the next aspect we're going to want to get is Wind Striker. Now, there is definitely something better, but this is guaranteed every time. Critical strikes grant 8% movement speed up to 6 seconds, completed by, you can unlock it by completing Shivta Ruins in Kyrgyzstan. So a very critical strike focused build. I think this is perfect since you're going to be getting critical strikes all the time. Also, Necromancer has really bad mobility. As you've noticed, there's pretty much nothing that increases our move speed. So Wind Striker aspect is actually going to help us because we can finally get around a little bit better, because there was really just nothing in the skill tree that increases our move speed for the Bone Necromancer. Now we're also going to want to get Sacrificial Aspect. You can get this from the ruins of Eridu in Hawazar. Your sacrifice bonuses are increased by 15%. It's not a huge amount, but since we're sacrificing both our skeletons and our golem, it's nice to get increased sacrifice effect from them even further. And then finally, the last aspect is Aspect of Shared Misery from Oblivion and Hawazar. Lucky hit: when you hit a crowd controlled enemy, there's a 30% chance for that crowd control effect to spread to another unaffected enemy. And the reason I like this is because, you know, if you cast Corpse Tendrils, it's nice to have a chance that it's going to basically spread those 3 afflictions, the stun, well, I guess the 2 of them, stun and slow, potentially to more monsters, which then hopefully can get hit by more Corpse Explosions and deal even more damage. So those are the aspects I'd recommend you go after. Bone Necro doesn't have crazy options for things that you can get guaranteed. There's a lot that you have to search for that are even better, but this is sort of the starting set of aspects you can seek out. Now we have 20 more skill points points. So we're going to go ahead and put actually, we want 3 points into unliving energy. And the reason we want to increase our maximum essence so much is because the more essence we have, the more damage we deal actually. And we get that from multiple different things. One of them being the key passive, ossified essence. Your bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. So that's 9% increased damage by increasing our maximum energy. Also want compound fracture, 3 out of 3, not related to what we were just talking about, but this is actually one thing I forgot to increase even further. And then we're going to get 3 out of 3 imperfectly balanced. Your core skills cost 9% more essence, but deal 15% increased damage. So we want to upgrade that as much as we can. Then we also do want to increase corpse explosions damage as much as we can, 5 out of 5 corpse explosion. And then we also want to get 3 out of 3 standalone. So it was previously 6% increased damage reduction, move that up to 18%. So we're as tanky as possible against everything that attacks us. And then we also want to upgrade, of course, fueled by death. We want that to be 3 out of 3. You deal 9% increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse, and also increase grim harvest. Consuming a corpse generates 9 essence. This is very, very powerful. You're definitely going to want that one. All right. And your last 3 points you can put into hewed flesh. Lucky hit, your damage has a 12% chance to create a corpse at the target's location. This chance is doubled against bosses, so 24% chance to create a corpse. So the reason this is good is because we have corpse explosion and corpse tendrils. Both of these put together are going to be very, very nice. And we want to continue to be able to use that against bosses. Of course, bosses are going to not be afflicted by crowd control until they become staggered, but if they summon minions, it can be nice to also use that against them. And of course, once you create these corpses, you could just use corpse explosion on them as well. And there's a really nice aspect we can get where having corpses are going to be very, very useful against bosses. So hewed flesh is great. Not to mention 24% chance with Bone Spear's 50% lucky hit chance, which is absurdly high, is actually somewhere around like 40%. So you have a very good chance of making lots of corpses against bosses with Bone Spear. So that's the skills. Those are the aspects. I do want to talk a little bit about better aspects than what we've found currently, because while these aspects are good for leveling, there are definitely better options. So switching over to aspects that are better than what we have selected, one of them is aspect of explosive mist. Blood mist triggers corpse explosion on surrounding corpses. When blood mist detonates a corpse, its cooldown is reduced by 0.5 seconds or more than that, depending on your role of it. So this is one of the Necromancer's strongest aspects. Basically, blood mist is going to cause corpse explosion, which we've made really strong. And what's really great about it is that it's going to reduce the cooldown of blood mist, so you can use it even more frequently. And because we have 3 out of 3 hewed flesh, it's going to make it so there's tons of corpses next to bosses or just against enemies. And so explosive mist can detonate all those for you all at once. Not only that, we can even make blood mist stronger by getting enhanced blood mist, which whenever you overpower, it reduces the cooldown by 2 seconds, but also ghastly blood mist. Blood mist leaves behind a corpse every 1 second, essentially, and it lasts for 3 seconds. So 3 additional corpses that you can explode during blood mist. So that's very powerful. Highly recommend aspect of the explosive mist in order to make your blood mist much stronger, much more aggressive, and not just a defensive ability. We're also going to want to get aspect of exposed flesh, up to a 10% chance to generate 30 to 50 essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy with your bone skills. Because you're going to be causing so many enemies to get vulnerable, this is going to be an excellent aspect to seek out. And the reason essence is so important is because of our key passive, which increases damage we deal the more essence we have. The same goes for a lot of our skills. The more essence we have when we use them, the more damage we're going to do, the more effective they're going to be. And we also want to get aspect of serration. The ossified essence key passive also increases the critical strike damage of your bone skills by 1% per essence above 50, up to 30% or 30 to 40, depending on your role. So once again, we were just talking about it actually. The more essence we have, the more powerful our Necromancer is going to be. And so we want lots of essence generation, but also here, this is going to increase critical strike damage up to 30 to 40%, which is huge. That's a huge amount of increased critical strike damage. This is a very powerful offensive aspect for the Bone Necromancer. Okay, great. And that is all of the updated ones. And of course, you know, you can, there's actually a unique you can get, Deathless Visage or Visage. Bone Spear leaves behind echoes as it travels that explode, dealing 125 to 175 damage. Aspect of the Protector was pretty weak anyways, so Deathless Visage is definitely a very, very strong unique you can go for to make your Necromancer even stronger. You know, this is a great Bone Necromancer unique for sure. There is a defensive you could get instead of Aspect of Might as well. You can get Aspect of Shielding Storm. Each time that Bone Storm damages an enemy, you gain a barrier equal to 2 to 5% of your base life for 10 seconds. Since it's a swirling AoE, this is definitely going to build up quite a bit. It's not going to reduce your damage by like damage you take by 25% like the previous aspect of the protector, but this could definitely be a good way to get a barrier if that's something you're looking for, instead of that reduced damage. And also doesn't make it so that you have to use your basic skill every 4 seconds previously. So this could also be an option as well. When it comes to the Paragon board, I actually already went ahead and got 196 or so Paragon points, and I'm going to walk you through generally the idea. And I thought this was cool how it's circle, right? Like the whole Necromancer theme is like all shall serve the cycle, right? And it's kind of like a circle. Basically, this is the starter board. I recommend picking up the Prime rare node for increased damage and life, and then moving over here for increased damage and increased intelligence rather than our other options here, which are more defensive. This is armor, this is resistance. You could get them, but focusing more on damage. And then our first Paragon board is going to be Bone Graft. Kind of a giveaway with the name. Bone Graft says hitting enemies with bone skills increases your damage by 1% and your maximum essence by 3 for 8 seconds, stacks up to 7.5% increased damage and 22.5 maximum essence. Of course, this just synergizes perfectly with the way we're building this Bone Necromancer. We want as much maximum essence and increased damage as possible because maximum essence actually translates into increased damage and increased critical strike damage. So Bone Graft is perfect. We're also going to move over to the Scent of Death tree. When there are at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction. When there are no corpses nearby, you deal 15% increased damage. So I can see this being very useful against bosses. You're probably going to fluctuate between the two depending on how fast you use Corpse Explosion and consume those corpses for increased damage. And when there are no corpses nearby, you deal that increased damage. And then when there are at least 2 corpses nearby, you'll get 15% damage reduction before you start casting Corpse Explosion. And you can use this to your advantage. If you see a boss like charging up an ability, you could hold off and let the corpses sit there and then, have that 15% reduced damage after the boss's ability is cast. Then you can start using your Corpse Explosions. So it's just a way to more intentionally be able to switch between a more defensive playstyle and a more offensive playstyle, depending on the situation. And then as you progress to your next Paragon board, you're going to want to get Flesh Eater. Consuming 5 corpses grants 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. I can see this happening right after you use Blood Mist and you have Aspect of Explosive Mist. You're definitely going to pop at least 5 corpses. So right as you come out of Blood Mist, you're basically going to have 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. You can kind of just mentally make that note like, okay, I'm going to use Blood Mist, and right when I come out, I'm going to use all my abilities to have that 40% increased damage for 6 seconds, maybe against a boss or something like that. Then the final Paragon board that we want is Hulking Monstrosity. Your Golem has 30% increased maximum life and deals 30% increased damage. Now, the reason I chose this one is because we'd actually have an alternative way we can build this character. Let's say we get to World Tier 4 and things start getting really dicey. I think it's actually not a bad idea to go ahead and get Golem. And the way that this would look like is we'd get rid of Corpse Tendrils right here. See, it's gone. And we'd actually choose right here the Blood Golem. And it says here, your Golem absorbs 15% of the damage you would take. So it's an extra 15% damage reduction at the cost of losing Corpse Tendrils. Depending on how much damage reduction you need, honestly, this build doesn't have a ton of it. And so you could absolutely go out and get this. You don't have to. You could stick with the 30% increased critical strike damage, but I just think having your Golem there give you 15% essentially reduced damage at all times is extremely strong. And we're still keeping Corpse Explosion and Blood Mist. And of course, we are going to replace that aspect of Constricting Tendrils with aspect of Explosive Mist anyways. And so the build kind of shifts away from Corpse Tendrils in the later stages, and I would recommend you pick up Blood Golem for that 15% reduced damage. I think it's a fair trade. Constricting Tendrils are extremely powerful, but I think when you get to the end game, you'll have more than enough clearing ability, and it has a decent 11-second cooldown. And so I think it's just stronger to switch over to a Blood Golem. And of course, you'd then put 3 points into Golem Mastery to increase the life and damage of your Golem by 75%. There's also a lot of bonuses you can get in the Golem tree that actually give your character some extra strength, which is like Borrowed Strength. Deal 5% increased damage while Golem is active. That's pretty awesome. You also get 1.5% total armor while Golem is active, and then another 5% bonus damage while Golem is active if requirements are met. So this Paragon board, I think, makes sense to make your Golem stronger. It's going to be absorbing damage for you. It also has a nice AoE drain life. I think Blood Golem is the strongest Golem possible. There's also another synergy that I do want to mention, which is Bone Storm. It says a swirling storm of bone appears around you and your Golem, dealing 180% over 10 seconds. So your Golem is going to get that Bone Storm. So I do think ultimately the build is meant to have a Golem. I just think it's worth getting maybe a little bit later after you've gotten some value out of Constricting Tendrils and you found a better aspect, and then you can switch over to the Golem. But it's up to you. you deciding on when you want to switch over, get rid of corpse tendrils and get the blood golem. I just think that corpse tendrils paired with corpse explosion is so strong, but you can absolutely make that switch whenever you see fit. And that is the Bone Necromancer. I think it's a extremely strong build, makes critical strike and vulnerability coupled together very powerful. I think Bone Spear is one of the strongest core skills in the entire game, especially if you have really good positioning and a single target is getting hit by both your Bone Spear and the splinters that ricochet back at them. Very, very fun, exciting build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, do me a huge favor and click that like button and subscribe for more Diablo 4 content. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.